Good day, Cal. It's kind of smoky out here in Alberta. There's a lot of smoke around the world right now, and I think one of the topics we should be talking about is the smoking gun with Israelis and Iran over their nuclear site bombings. What's your take on that?
Well, I'm glad the wind's blowing the right direction. The smoke's going back on your end of the world.
Geez,
But,
thanks.
over the last couple of days, Israel again has struck Iran, unprovoked attacks, assassination of major leaders. One has to wonder, who is the real problem in the Middle East? Is it, as we see in our media, everybody blames Iran, or is it Israel and their aggression against other countries? So when you look at the list of countries that came out uh, opposed to this strike, it's not surprising. Turkey, Saudi Arabia, for example, oppose the fact that Iran is being bombed. Now, they may have a vested interest in the fact that it would be quite possible that if they supported Israel, Iran would bomb the sites, the oil and gas sites in Saudi Arabia and other regional, locations. So it may be their best interest to support Iran. Again, it's unfortunate.
Yeah, it's. I had the opportunity of meeting a fellow from Iran. He's over there right now, and in Iran they have a lot of issues going on. I mean, one thing is that they do have a, I don't know what you call it, totalitarian regime or whatever. And they used to be a democratic regime up until the 60s. I think there's a underlying hope that the world will allow Iran to change its leadership. But I don't think this is the means or the ways of doing it. Bombing the nuclear plants is potentially dangerous. It could cause a lot of radiation in the air in Iran, and that can go all around the world. So it was precarious of Israel to target the nuclear facilities. Targeting the leadership and the generals and eradicating the leaders was something that they had planned all along to do as a means of trying to be disruptive in Iran politics. My take is that the U.S., Donald Trump, was behind a lot of this. And the reason that I say that he was behind a lot of it is because it's smoke and mirrors again. I think Trump has to have a war that drags the U.S. into it to get the total control of military as the commander in chief. One of the means is instigating a war with the Israelis starting it and then hoping that Iran attacks the U.S. military bases over in the Middle East or instigate something that Trump can say, well, we're involved now, but I didn't drag us in, when in fact it's a smoke and mirror show. He's hoping that Iran will drag the U.S. in so he can take total control of the military in the U.S., and that allows internal use of the military for crowd control, using it for ICE to control the people within the U.S., as well as aiding Israel in dealing with Gaza, because now it's a conflict that the U.S. is directly involved in. So I think there's some real issues on the credibility of what the motive behind Israel's attack on Iran are. What's your
Well,
take on that?
the first fiction is that Iran used to be a democracy. It's funny how people forgot about the Shah, and it was the Shah of Iran that was overthrown by the Islamist government. So Iran, you can't say Iran in at least modern history has been a democracy unless you look at what a democracy is, and a democracy is that people vote for their leaders, whether or not Western powers agree with those leaders or not is whether or not our press says they're democratic. You know,
Well, it's a
it's
matter of degrees, I think, as to what constitutes a democracy. If you're sort of voting for a leader and you have rights as an individual, I mean, there is gray area. I don't think there's too many real democracies in the world. I can't think of any country that's truly a democracy, but that's me.
yeah.
There's two in
So
Europe that class themselves pretty close.
well, there is no doubt that Israel and the U.S. want a regime change in Iran. Iran has, you know, the top 5 resources of oil and gas in the world, and it's a
All about the
large.
money.
It's follow the money, and
Yep.
and the thing is, the Israelis don't have that kind of economic stability. They rely on handouts from the U.S. To fund their military and to keep their budget afloat. So there's an animosity there with respect to natural resources. The Iranians, I don't know why they think they need nuclear power. They have enough oil and gas. The only plausible explanation is in order to protect themselves from Israel, they may need to become a nuclear power. In other words, they could threaten
Well,
to
I
obliterate.
think it goes back to when Iraq and Iran were at war. They had a war ongoing for years between the two countries, and Iran really didn't come out on top of that war, and that's when they started wanting to be more aligned to having nuclear power in the region, especially since Israelis already had nuclear power.
It's a way they can protect themselves, is the way they're viewing it. And
It's a
all Israel,
deterrent. It's definitely a deterrent. I don't know if it's a valid deterrent. There's a lot of land between the Israelis and Iran. How would they invade ground forces? The only way that Israelis could go into Iran is if the U.S. got direct involvement. And if U.S. is directly involved, that means Canada, Europe, everybody's drug into a war just like it happened in Iraq over the pretense that Iraq had nuclear weapons, and it was all about trying to get hands on oil in Iraq, and that didn't pan out too well for anybody, especially Canada. We used to be peacekeepers until that direct involvement in the war. Now we've got a reputation loss that's going to take us decades to rebuild. Iran has a lot of internal conflict, and it's up to the Iranian people to decide what they want for leadership. Outside influence, like the Israelis bombing and then saying, hey, people of Iran, step up and do regime change. Well, that's not really going to fly. It's nice ideology, but that's not going to work.
if you look at the way our media has handled this, even the prior G7 meetings where they're ganging up in their statements against Russia and Iran, and you look at the penalties and sanctions that were brought in against Russia for its occupation of parts of the Ukraine, and you look at the lack of sanctions and against Israel for what it's doing in Gaza, and you can understand why the Israelis believe they can do whatever they want. You know, they can attack third parties like Syria, Lebanon, Beirut. They can do whatever they want, and they've got the bullies standing behind them, promising to back them up and provide them with weapons. And our media and our government in particular hasn't said much. You know, they call for a de-escalation. Where's the condemnation? Where are the sanctions? Where, you know, it's, you know, and the prosecutor who brought, you know, the head of the International Court of Justice, he ends up with allegations of some kind of sexual abuse against the staffer, and totally distracts from the fact that people are dying. Tens of dozens of people are dying in Gaza every day trying to get food. So it's a total distraction from all of that. Then you add in the big parade in the U.S. that had next to no turnout, and the demonstrations about no king, and the poor people in Gaza are being exterminated, and the world is got all these other distractions. I think if you look at who's the problem, it points to one country, and Canada is afraid to sanction them.
Well, maybe Canada's supposed to be doing more alliances with the European Union. That I think is going to come out of the G7, is that Canada is doing some military investing with the UE and rebuilding it. What I find really funny is that Putin and Trump had a large conversation, according to Trump, for an hour or two. And right after that, Putin starts bombing Ukraine infrastructure and energy and attacking civilians. But Putin never stepped in line to deal or side with Iran in the Israeli matter. So I wonder if Putin and Trump have got a deal made that says, hey, no matter what happens, if something happens in Iran, we can divvy up oil deals or whatever, because Trump wants to cut a deal with Iran to stop producing uranium development for warheads. And there must be some sort of deal that Putin hasn't stepped in to help Iran on the table. So when you're looking at these two individuals, it has to do with Iranian oil for sure. And I just seen a thing where I kind of got an understanding of why these huge 50% tariffs on steel in the US are occurring. Trump has made a deal with Nippon Steel through Congress or whatever to allow them to acquire US steel, provided that Trump gets to appoint one director of 3 directly to the board, and he has veto power on who gets the other 2 board positions. And that was released in a news article yesterday that I pulled up. And that all of a sudden clicked. Hey, there's why the 50% tariff on steel. It had to do with Trump having control over Nippon Steel, controlling the whole industry in the US. If he puts a tariff on, he stands to make more money, because the board of directors appoints who's getting paid and in priority to the shareholders. And Nippon Steel would have lost a bit of control of their company for the hopes of making profits in the US, and hoping that Trump may not be there in a few years. I mean, the Japanese are playing a long-term game with politics on the steel by cutting a deal and then hoping that whoever comes in as president after Trump, if there ever is a new regime change in the US, that they can get that directorship control removed. So I don't know what's behind the Iranian deal that Trump's trying to strike. He struck down the deal that Iran had with the international community not to proceed with nuclear weapons. Last term, he never got a deal struck with them. Iran cannot trust the US, especially when their closest allies, the Israelis, bombed them. So I don't know.
Nobody can trust Trump. Even
That's the point.
Even if his own advisors can't trust him, his wife can't trust him. He's one of the most untrustable psychopaths as a world leader that I can think of. It's insane. So why would anybody even negotiate with him? You just hope that he keeps his word for the short time that he is still on this earth, and eventually, being of advanced age, maybe he'll pass on from something, and who knows, the next idiot may be just as bad.
That the G7, I can't see anything ever coming about with Trump there. I mean, I think Trump is just there because he wanted to golf in Kananaskis, and
they've already
a little variety, because no other countries will let him into their country. He figures he can go golf.
They've already said that there won't be a joint communique.
Exactly, which is the whole reason of holding a G7, well, G6 with Felon, is have a joint communique agreeing on what their policies are going to be. So why are we wasting $600 to $800 million of taxpayer money to hold this ridiculous meeting in the mountains for a holiday retreat for the leaders? You know, here's my predictions. I'm just going to transition into my predictions. I predict there's going to be no steel deal because of what I explained about Trump profiting from the Nippon deal he's executing in the U.S. Trump's going to spend half a day golfing. It's going to cost taxpayers of Canada a lot of money. There's going to be no resolutions, like you said. And Trump refuses to aid Ukraine, and I think he's going to stomp out of the Ukraine meeting because how dare you tell me what I should be doing in Ukraine to go against my buddy Putin. So that's my take on it. I don't know what's your take on going to happen. Carney's supposed to be meeting this morning, actually in about 5 minutes, with Trump directly. Will Carney have any influence on Trump?
I was shocked when you mentioned the budget of $600 million. I had to look that up.
Well,
Apparently,
that's what it cost. The last meeting 7 years ago in Canada was $600 million in Quebec.
well, what they say, 300 million on the last one. The current one is budgeted for 600. Oh, wait a minute, you're right.
Okay.
Yeah, no,
I could be wrong, but it's
no,
huge
hang on. Yeah,
It's a huge
yeah,
amount.
yeah. It's an unbelievable amount of money, and the thing is, it's going to be a waste of money.
Well, couldn't they do like we're doing, a simple, video conference call to resolve and set down nothing? They're doing nothing.
Well, you know what would happen? Trump would put it on mute and sit there and carry on whatever he's doing and ignore everybody anyways. At least,
Well,
at least this way they can sit there and look at him. You
well, he's
know,
going to be out playing golf. He's not going to be talking to any of them.
well, they had pictures of his wife falling asleep at the military parade, and of course the rumors started immediately that she was a stand-in, that they have a body double because she smiled,
Yeah.
and well, and that cost, somewhere around 45 million. And if you
Well, did
figure
you see
10,
those posts that were saying a lot of people in the audience were paid to be there by Trump cryptocurrency?
no, I didn't. But if
Oh,
there's 10,000 people there, as some people claim, that's
wow.
$4,500 per person to put on that show.
Oh yeah, like it's
You know,
expensive. Like what a, and it made the U.S. look totally weak and stupid. I mean, all credibility for the U.S. military, and it just blew up right there. I mean, the minute you run a dictatorship military parade and nobody shows up, it sort of undermines the credibility of the whole U.S. Putin must be laughing his pants off, going, "You can't even do a parade. Look at my parade." North Korea is laughing, "Look, we got better parades than you do." And, there's old Trump trying to be a muscle man, looking as weak as couldn't be any weaker looking with a military parade that blew up in his face. I mean, the No King movement pretty much sums it up. The U.S. is in a civil war. Hopefully it remains peaceful, but it is a civil war ongoing in the U.S. And look at those damn senators or whoever it was shot down there in the last 2 days. I mean, that's pathetic. And Trump never even went on TV and condemned it, which is, to me, facilitating that he condoned.
you mean condemn?
Condemn, yeah.
Yes.
You got to condemn those type of actions, but he's not even going in the media and saying that's not good.
So looking at the cost again, apparently they think the summit could generate around 240 million for Alberta's economy. So maybe Alberta should quit crying for a while.
Oh yeah, that'll
That's
never
that's a
happen.
that's according to the Calgary Chamber of Commerce, and of course they're rocket scientists.
Well, I know downtown Calgary's got a lot of protests going on, different groups protesting on either side of equations, and pretty peaceful, but there is room for discussions on all sorts of avenues there.
Well, a lot of people disagree with letting a felon into the country. If you would,
Oh,
if you don't let criminals into this country, why make an exception? However, it's obvious why you have to do that. But the
well,
question is still there.
Von shits in pants. I hope he fills his drawers out there. And they have to whiff that, that smell that comes from them. I think Midas Touch summed it up pretty good when they were calling him Von shits in pants, where he stunk the courtroom up. So that was coined by what's his name there.
Apparently, they have a restricted flight area around Kananaskis, and somebody, I guess, strayed into it. They scrambled NORAD jets to chase a civilian aircraft out of the no-fly zone. I wonder what that
cost. Probably one of those coal mining planes that just didn't realize it wasn't allowed in Kananaskis. We've been sort of led to believe it was going to be Banff, not Kananaskis in the news. We always referred to Banff. So maybe one of those New Zealand coal mining planes surveying the area. Who knows? But that's kind of controversial too, is Alberta allowing mining of the coal in the mountains.
As if they needed.
Yeah, no. But that's another issue all on of its own. I guess we'll have no lack of topics we can talk about. I just wanted to cover over some of the predictions on the G7 and this Iran-Israeli fight. It's 3 days now. I mean, it's just missiles on missiles shooting back and forth. I think the Israelis have a better dome protection system than the Iranians, but eventually, they're going to stop shooting missiles, and I can't see it ongoing.
Well, here's the thing too. Look at our news. When they killed senior members of the Iranian forces, the word they use is killed. If it were the other way around, the word they would use is assassinated. And the linguistics our media uses alone in order to paint a picture that is one-sided, you have to watch that carefully when you're reading the news. What are they really saying?
Well, the news is owned by the wealthy, and there's only a few wealthy people, and they control all the media pretty much in the world, and especially in the U.S. So we have to take it with a grain of salt, and I think that's where governments around the world are going to have to start looking at, like Canada has CBC, where it's government run, but it's afraid to voice concerns because the opposition always threaten to get rid of it in favor of privately owned media that favor their agendas. So we do need to have a better media coverage. Otherwise, they're going to rely on people like you and me, to hold podcasts to try to uncover the truth, and we don't even have access to all the information to make informed decisions either.
Well, I think what people have to do is when they read the stories in the media, they have to look at, whose media is it to begin with. But what you should also do is reverse the words. If it says, for example, Israel launches a preemptive strike on Iran, what would the news say if Iran launched a a strike on Israel? What would they call that? Would they be writing that it's wonderful that the Israelis had a 200 fighter bombing campaign? What would they say if it was the other way around? What would they say, for example, and what are they saying when people die in Israel and completely ignore the fact that people are dying in Gaza?
I think it was a lot of smoke and mirrors. I think the Israelis wanted to hit Iran to deflect that they're doing the clearing and leveling operation in Gaza, and that allowed them to do a lot more. Like, we're not getting any news on Gaza. We're not getting any news on whether food relief and health issues are being dealt with in Gaza. We've totally been deflected to the Iranian issue when Gaza is still an ongoing problem and there's starvation and genocide being executed. That's a problem.
And it'll be off the table when they meet at the G7 because
Yeah.
they're going to be worried that Iran could shut down, oil exports. That's
Well, I mean,
going to be a major
that's
concern.
the thing that Iran has the ability to do is if they really want to get at the U.S., all they have to do is hit the Saudi oil refineries, and that will cause some, big problems. But it might not. Maybe that's the underlying reason that the Israelis started it, want to draw the U.S. in. Putin isn't doing anything about it because if Iran does bomb the Saudi oil refineries, Putin and Trump will have a deal saying, hey, we're not going to put an embargo on Putin's oil anymore because we can't get oil from the Saudis, so Putin can finance his war machine and try to take over the Ukraine. So there could be underlying motives that indirectly they're hoping happens as a result of the Israeli-Iran conflict. But, I hope that's not the reasons for it, but you can't trust Putin, and you sure as heck can't trust Trump. And there's a lot of money on the table. If the Saudi oil refineries go down, Putin can make a lot of money because the price of oil will jump and skyrocket. Trump will make money because he's got to deal with Putin. So when the money's on the table, look at the money. Now that's could be the next thing is Iran's pressured to hit the Saudi oil refinery complexes, and price of oil is going to skyrocket, probably double or triple, and that would force the world to have to accept Russian oil to compensate for the lack of oil coming out of Saudi. And Iran might benefit too because it can ship some of its oil onto the market. So I don't trust the situation in the Middle East.
Well, to add fuel to the fire, I guess there's Iranian ministers that are saying that Pakistan has agreed to provide them with long-range missiles and has promised to attack Israel with nuclear weapons in the event that Israel uses a nuclear weapon on Iran. So that would certainly increase the tension around the world.
Yeah, no, that's problematic for sure. I don't know. I guess we gotta hope that they just calmer minds prevail, and it's unfortunate people have died in both countries, but we shouldn't allow Israelis to, aggressively attack their neighbors for no real reasons. There was a deal being worked out for the Iranian nuclear program. Iran had signed a deal with the rest of the world, and the U.S. under Trump backed out. So it wasn't like they weren't dealing in good faith. The only bad character in the dealings has been and will always be Trump. And Iran really can't trust them, so how can you cut a deal with them? I think Canada and the European Union should cut their own deal with Iran and say U.S. and Israelis be damned, and that would cause a settlement to the ongoing missile strikes for sure.
Well, I'm waiting for our government to say that they condemn the attack. Like, just say that we condemn the attack, and then follow that up with, and maybe we're going to finally get around to sanctions.
Well, we're do. I mean, that would be good leadership, and Carney should take the opportunity to show that he's got kahunas for sure.
Yeah.
So I guess that's pretty much it. I don't know what else you want to cover in this one.
Well, again, I think people, when they read the news, what they need to do is just reverse the words a little bit and see if it makes any sense. What if the world was limiting humanitarian aid and food to Israel? How would that sound? What kind
Yeah.
of outcry would there be if there was a total, embargo on Israel, surrounded by unfriendly countries that didn't let anything in or out, and starving the people? How would the world react to that?
Well, I
It's
think what you're pointing out, what just comes to mind is that, since World War II, we set up the United Nations, and that is what it was supposed to do. It was supposed to be a buffer between countries that were having problems. And because they got veto votes and there's no ability for the UN to have any teeth, you have countries like Israelis and Gaza and Iran going at it, where the UN should have been able to be positioned to say, hey, stop this, and had some teeth to be able to make it stop. And as long as you give the power to Putin and the power to the Trumps of the world and power to China to veto any ability of the UN to intervene, I mean, we are one Earth. And what's the problem with resolving conflicts? It's just a matter of desire and negotiation. So I find it really pathetic that in a world with modern technology, we can't come up with the ability to resolve conflicts.
Yeah. Well, I think part of this is, again, a distraction. Israel is going all in. They're going all in to get Gaza depopulated. Next will be the West Bank. Parts of Syria will be taken over. Maybe Lebanon will lose some land to Israeli expansion. It just, and anybody that supports any of these people that are fighting for their right to survive will become an enemy of Israel. Iran
Yeah.
in particular, they call it a shadow war, because Iran supports some of these groups that normally one would look at and say, well, they're fighting for their freedom, they're fighting for their homeland, and
Well,
and
the U.S. is going to be fighting for their homeland, because if the Israelis can provoke Iran to attack a U.S. military base, Trump gets exactly what he wants: absolute military power under the state of war, and he can use that power to his advantage. They may never have another election again in the U.S. if that happens. So,
well, apparently the Israelis can't blow the top off the mountain where the Iranians have buried their nuclear facilities, but the Americans can. So
you
if
know,
Israel can convince the Americans that it's in their best interest, you can be sure they'll be there, and they'll be dropping, the mega
they don't
bombs.
have to convince the U.S. that it's in their best interest. They have to convince Trump that there's money and power in his pocket by doing it. So there's the difference between what the U.S. used to be and what the U.S. under a fascist regime is all about. All they have to do is convince Trump that he gets his beachfront property in Gaza, makes a lot of money, and gets even a royalty off the oil in Iran. He'd be more than willing to cut a deal with Putin to divvy up the rewards of regime change in Iran. If Trump gets the power to control the military and never have another election in the U.S. because they're in a state of war, then he has absolute power. And he declared war on drug trade and traffic so he could have the right to control the military, and the courts in the U.S. are pulling back on that a bit. So his ultimate goal is to actually be drug into a war that gives him the full power of the military, and that would be going to war against Iran. So it's just about convincing Trump that he makes nothing but money from dragging the U.S. into it. My guess is the U.S. is getting drug into it. Give it about 7-8 days after the G7 result, or sooner. If he's made to look bad in the G7 meeting, Trump's going to move the agenda up to get the military power because of the military parade looks so horrendous and weak. He's going to try to get that image back, and I think Iran is his Hail Mary to get the military power.
Should be interesting. This week will tell what the G7's all about.
Yeah, we're going to have to pick more happy topics and more cheerful topics in the future. It's a little depressing talking about all these world conflicts that should be, dealt with by the UN and resolved in an amicable fashion, not to cost, civilian lives. Those are basically war crimes when you're attacking civilians and should not be tolerated by any country in the world. So I guess on that note, we can call this a wrap, eh?
Have a good week.
Yeah, you too. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Subscribe to the channel, give us a like, and please share the video. Don't be afraid to share this commercial with your friends too.